Okay, so we have a little bit of time. Andre, is it a? Half an hour. Okay, plenty of time. We can talk. Okay, first question.
Hi. I have a question for Bud Walsh. My name is Wally Pereira, and I've been involved.
I know you, Wally.
Been in this process for quite a few years, and at the time that the efforts were made to create the Magnuson Act or build on Magnuson Act, there were some reports that predated the Magnuson Act. One of them was the Stratton report, and I think we all recall that as almost a seminal report in its own self. What role do you think that had in setting the stage for the Magnuson Act?
Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Stratton Commission report, Dr. Stratton was head of MIT, and Warren Magnuson and other senators were concerned about the lack of attention to ocean policy. And they tried to encourage more attention, and they created basically what you guys called the Ocean Commission. The Pew Commission to me was an ex-government. It's not a democratic, that was appointed by certain people, whereas this was the democratic process. So they created the Stratton Commission, which identified a whole series of ocean policy questions, many of which were addressed here. One of the main recommendations was the creation of NOAA. NOAA, believe it or not, was created by an executive order signed right after EPA by Richard Nixon. Stroke of the pen. And the idea was to bring together all the scientific capability, and the Weather Service at that time is extraordinary. You know, their weather satellites lasted well beyond their useful lives at the early years. Just brilliant operation. And the hope was to synergize, I hate that word, but to bring them together to give more scientific clout to analysis of the ocean problem. They recommended the Coastal Zone Management Act. And I was involved in helping to draft the Washington Shoreline Act. I was involved in approving the first Coastal Zone Management Act in California and putting greater emphasis on these fisheries matters. But it avoided the question of extended jurisdiction for the reasons that I cited. The Defense Department, the State Department had a lock, and we were negotiating in the Law of the Sea Conference, and we took a position that did not include extended jurisdiction because we believed if the world was divided differently then. We had the lesser developed countries, which were called the third world. Then we had the communist world, which in my view stimulated fisheries more than anybody else because everything was subsidized and all you had was a quota. You didn't have to be profitable. So what was happening is we had a stranglehold, and we thought that if these countries would be willing to accept our acceptance of their extended jurisdiction, then they would buy transit rights for our submarines through the Malacca Straits. That was the thinking of the Defense Department. That's how we ran it. And so they avoided the question of extended jurisdiction. There'd been 2 Law of the Sea treaties and they'd failed. And we were then, about that time, getting ready for the 3rd Law of the Sea Conference. But fisheries was a chip to be traded, and it was not the focus because at that the Stratton Commission, 1970, because of the fact, I'll finish, don't worry. I get paid by the hour. I'm not going to tell you what I'm charging you. But it wasn't there. But I do want to make one more comment because I think what Sam said at the end was the most significant, one of the most significant things said here. I went to the European Seafood Conference last year. I don't know if you've ever been there. 25,000 people, 10 football fields, every country. There was a Somalia tuna company. They weren't pirates either, as far as I can tell. And what I realized, they were all speaking English. They all wore Western clothes. They were all engaged in the capitalist system, and they were trading seafood throughout the world. And if you go to that conference, you will see the dynamic that Sam's talking about. And we're playing catch-up because they aren't managing their fisheries.
Okay.
Is this on? Yep, it's on. We got a microphone, because that way we can actually hear your question a little bit better. So don't make your question until I found you, but also, if possible, if you could say who you are. We all know who Waddy is, so he didn't need to announce himself. But anybody else with questions, if you could say who you are and then give your question. Strangely enough, I know the next speaker.
Thanks, Andre. I'm Kate Wing, and I have always wondered, why are the Regional Fishery Management Council boundaries what they are? Bud, did you do that? Or if not, can you explain why there are 3 regions on the East Coast and only one for the entire West Coast?
What they are?
Yeah, why did they draw the
Boundaries.
boundaries for the councils where they are?
Well, oh, good, that's not, I thought you were asking an existential question. I don't, I'll go back to the Peloponnesian Wars then. It was, well, I guess I just did it. We sat in the room and said, with the Fishery Service, what would be the conglomerations, knowing that you had to draw, well, one of the problems is you got to draw a boundary. And I can't tell you that they were rational or intelligent, but they were closely enough grouped, and it's close enough for government work, I guess. I don't have anything other than to say that.
Sam may know a little bit
So,
how it came about.
well, I can't say how it came about, but one of the things that we've done since then is look at things called large marine ecosystems, where we look at fish stock assemblages. And the ironic thing is that many of the fish stocks do map out kind of along the council boundaries, so that
Well, that's why we did it.
yeah, exactly.
Science.
Exactly. Many of the, in the South, the biggest issue is like, where on, do the South Atlantic fishermen fish for the same kind of things that Mid-Atlantic fishermen do? Well, they don't really. They are, there are some overlap, but in many instances, it's because those fisheries are unique to that region. And I don't know whether that really went into your mind at the time, but it has worked out since.
It was the National Marine Fisheries Service that decided that some of those boundaries. It wasn't me, but we agree with it.
Actually, this is one where it was political. If you go on the Atlantic, add up the number of people in the states, because you had to have a certain number of obligatory members from each state, and you had to, and so what happened, the Mid-Atlantic Council had like 22 people on it, and because there were so many small states involved in it. And if you didn't have Washington and Oregon on the North Pacific Council,
that
you
was
wouldn't have
different.
anyone on it. Yeah, so I think because what happened then in the middle years is there were a lot of North Carolina wanted seats on the South Atlantic Council and
Yeah.
vice versa.
Yeah.
And so one of the big concerns was the growth in the size of the different councils. One of the things we proposed to do, and it lasted for about 15 minutes when we were
Yeah.
trying to deal with the highly migratory species, is we proposed to disband the Mid-Atlantic Council and divide them up and do bigger councils on the East Coast. And I think
The phone rang when you thought of it.
I made the mistake of telling someone outside of the office, and within 15 minutes, I had a call from Senator Kerry saying, "What are you doing?" Because he had had a call from 2 members from, I think from New York, and I can't remember. Yeah, that was the year you were there. So that's one of those issues that actually is political, I think,
But
rather than policy.
but it is a good question, because what is happening now, when you saw that those bills that were introduced every Congress, you had to I went through the list of them again. I thought, oh, Freedom to Fish Act again. Okay, lots of different bills, but there were all these bills to move people's seats around, because in fact what was happening is the fish were moving around. And so at some point you had councils making decisions where the member from the state that actually had the bigger fishery over time was not on the council. So we will have to deal with this over time, I would imagine. And it might just be, we sort of fudged it by saying, well, yeah, you can have somebody go there and do something. But, it really was very hard to, we had a lot of people trying to move from council to council, should New York be on the Mid-Atlantic Council, should New York be on the New England Council, everybody, and then you have one state on 3 councils, and at some point there will have to be a discussion about this.
So the best thing about the Pacific Council is you don't have to worry about it.
That's right.
Oh, I don't know. I've earned many a beer by saying which are the 4 states that are represented in the Pacific Council. Everyone says it's got to be Oregon, Washington, California, and Alaska, and the beer just rolls in because I never thought of Idaho. That is the question.
Hi, I am Usha Varanasi, and I am a former NIMS employee, the director of Northwest Fisheries Science Center. But the questions I am asking today are for the class we are teaching, and we have asked, with Professor Rogers and I are teaching class on ocean and coastal laws and the science. And our students are listening to all of you because this is being streamed. And so I have 3 questions. You can either tell me that the answers will be coming in the next session, then that will be fine, or just give us answer. Sam said we are managing 538 species. So the question is, does that kind of cover the universe? Are we really harvesting? Are those enough of the species that we are harvesting, and we're not leaving any species unmanaged? So that's one question. The second question is, when we talked about climate seems to make such a big impact on how the fish stocks are going to be, and since 2007 reauthorization says ecosystem-based management, are we including climate and pollution and all in our models, or are we only including multi-species management? So that's the second question. The third question is, are we going to expand the Sustainable Fisheries Act to include international fisheries, or is it going to be in some different arena, and that you are all thinking that it's such a critical, important things, and the lawyers that whom we are teaching right now are going to be perhaps defending that. So is there anything in the Congress working towards expanding Magnuson-Stevens Act into
I'll take
making
that
it
one.
international Sustainable Fisheries Act?
Okay,
Anyway,
Usha, I'm gonna
these
start
are my 3 questions.
Yeah, Usha, I'm going to start with your last question, because I do think that what Congress is going to do in the future, I think that's another panel. Okay, it's the next one, in fact. But I would say the Magnuson, what we did in 2006 was recognize that the regional fishery management organizations that were established, that Bud referenced, are the ones that, by State Department's, encouragement, those are the things you should be strengthening. So our provisions were trying to actually help enforcement that would prompt that regional fishery, blocking imports and things like that if we could, to prompt the regional fishery management organizations for being stronger. I don't know, and there's been additional legislation since to try and make that even stronger. What this doesn't affect is national management of other, within their EEZs, and that's unaddressed. And I don't think that we, given what Bud did, I suppose anything's possible, but I don't see that happening except through the international process.
What were the first 2?
And the first 2 were, are we leaving any species unmanaged? And then the other one is,
Sam, are we?
well, the states, yeah.
Yeah, well, so the Magnuson Act only covers federal fisheries. So it does. So the states deal with fisheries in the state waters, and different states handle that differently. In terms of federal fisheries, we catch more than 538 species. Not all of them do we catch in any significant manner. Most of the other ones are incidentally caught at low levels and are not commercially or recreationally important. Of the 500 species, only about 200 of them are truly important, either for their environmental role or their economic role. And I think we do manage that. And so in any given year, that number could increase or decrease as the councils decide whether to add more or take certain stocks out because they're not important. But I think we cover within that the most important ones, but we don't cover every one of them. And the second question
Was, do you deal with climate change and
Right.
pollution impacts in your modeling?
So ideally we do. It is our intention to account, at least for climate change. Pollution is a little bit more difficult. Pollution is sort of wrapped up in natural mortality and things like that. If we understand climate change enough and we have the right tools, we absolutely do put them into the models. The problem is not the desire, it is often our ability to do that. How do you model that climate change? What parameters do you use? Those are difficult things. As we continue on and it's becoming more and more a factor in these fisheries, we are getting better. But I will not sit here and tell you today that all of our fisheries completely and totally account for all climate change impacts, because many of those we still don't know. You guys want to add something?
You tell Bill Rogers. Where is Bill Rogers? I came to your class yesterday, Bill, and you canceled it. And I could have answered these questions. He and I tried, I have tried my first case with this guy.
He canceled it by mistake.
You came up with,
So the students can come here and see you.
oh, stop it. So let me answer the question. I know about, to some extent, about the international issue because I do a lot of work for what's left of the U.S. tuna fleet, which operates in the Central and Western Pacific. And I do a lot of work for the large tuna processing and trading companies. And in fact, next month there will be a World Tuna Conference in which everybody comes, and I know the person who's going to be giving the keynote speech for one of the companies, and it's going to be very hard hitting. And we don't have jurisdiction out there. And there's no way to get leverage except unless you can put pressure on governments. For example, they can't get adequate recent data from many of the countries about their tuna fishing operations because they won't share it with the Commission, the Western Central Pacific Commission. And we're a couple of years out. And we're talking about large stocks of tuna. We're talking about, you know, the main source of canned tuna, which is skipjack in the Central and Western, 2.5 million tons. So how do you manage that when you don't get the data on time? How do you manage that when China, I mean, you know, the thing about it is it's still a free-for-all out there. If you have a large and growing population that needs protein, and Sam was talking about the shift, I mean, sooner or later there's going to be a middle class in China and they're going to start buying all this canned tuna, and it's not going to go to Europe and it's not going to go to the United States. It's going to go to China. They are building vessel after vessel to come out there. And there is a big problem of capacity. There's only 279 purse seiners, but everybody's trying to figure out a way around the rules. So what is being done? Well, what is being done is the environmental groups, after learning from the experience of something called dolphin safe labeling, which, by the way, is back before between the International Trade Agreement, they have decided that the way to discipline these fisheries is not to rely on governments, as good as Sam's team is, or these others, but to create at funnel points where the market, where you get access to the market, like the supermarkets, and say, okay, we don't want you to sell this kind of fish. We don't want you to sell tuna that is caught using fish aggregating devices. And it is a very real tool. And you don't get any more money for making sustainable tuna. You only get to the marketplace. So it is a huge problem. We have to rely on international agreements, but it isn't going to be enough.
I assume you can hear me. My name is Mike Szymanski, and I'm over here.
Oh, thank you.
The question I have is one that's kind of plagued me for some time more recently, and it's after watching for about 25 years various interpretations of the Magnuson Act and how it's interpreted, but what I call the biblical 10 commandments, national standards 1 through 10, and more recently reflecting on that, I'm curious as to what your individual feeling is as to whether or not the national standards should be read as a priority, starting with 1, conservation management, all the way down to safety in number 10, and or are they in a ranking, in your opinion, of priority, or are they co-equal commandments? And are we drifting away from interpreting them as individual and co-equal, or vice versa? Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Yeah, right. There's 10 national standards. Some of them conflict. I do not think they're in priority order, but we have interpreted National Standard 1 to be preeminent, which is you have to ensure optimum yield while ending overfishing. I would say National Standard 2, which says everything must be based on the best available science, is number 2. Beyond that, I think they are largely co-equal. They're certainly not in priority order. Safety of life at sea is a very strong driver, but is not, many times fishery issues don't arise that way, but we would try to avoid those. But, so that's my answer. Beyond the first two, I think they're largely co-equal.
Yeah, I would say some of that came out of court decisions, so I don't think it was always agreed upon, but certainly it is today, and I would agree anyway. You can't make it work without the fish out there, so that's a logical thing too. National Standard 9 bycatch minimization has always been a top concern, so to me that is very high up on the list and priorities, and the implementation is challenging, but without bycatch minimization, ultimately your overfishing and in your management on an ecosystem basis doesn't really work. So to me, that's important.
Hello, my name's Dave Glopke. I'm with Seaport Corporation in Kirkland, Washington. I'm in the seafood industry. And thanks very much for wonderful talks. From my perspective, you know, the advancements in sustainability are wonderful, but there's kind of almost a disconnect or a problem I see in my industry. The last maybe 5 years, there's been a decrease in the per capita consumption of seafood. And you know, how do you guys feel about that? I assume you're all seafood lovers. Have you ever thought about that broader view where it's growing internationally, but here in our own country, we have this problem seeming problem of declining per capita consumption of a very healthy protein?
So, at least from the fishery service perspective, that issue does concern us, because as I said at the outset, it is one of the most healthy proteins you could eat. We understand the Food and Drug Administration has said a healthy diet consists of 2 meals a week, which most people don't get. To some extent, promoting seafood is, as Bud said, and as I try to say, is promoting the sustainability of it. That, I think, helps when people believe that this is a clean technology, this is a renewable technology, this is a renewable process. It's healthy, it's good for the environment. The more that we can get that message out, the better we will do. But there are some issues with seafood production. There is a stability issue. If the quotas bounce around for a particular stock in any given year, wildly swing from huge abundances to the next year, you know, enormous cutbacks. Well, you can't develop those market dynamics, and you can't develop the consumer confidence that the consumer familiarization with that product that you need, that would come from some of the more stable agricultural practices. And so that's one of the things that I think we should look at, is how can we add more economic value to the fishery, which means increasing consumer demand and those kind of things, by looking at stability, looking at trust. How can we deal with those kinds of things? These are things that are of concern. I think we don't always have the tools to deal with them.
I think there's one other issue that we've kind of struggled with over time, is the labeling aspect of it. And there's never really been a completely uniform process, and there are a lot of independent groups. And one of the things that I think actually might be helpful would be for NOAA to take more of a leadership role and try. I think people are afraid of it, but at the same time, that's part of the problem, because you'll get the card from the aquarium that'll say one thing. People don't understand that maybe the swordfish that are that they're worried about one place may be a perfectly healthy stock somewhere else. The other thing is I think some of these big events like the Gulf situation with deep water and things like that make people worried. And so a lot of it is just really figuring out how to come up with a clear communication plan that gives people good information that they have confidence in. And I think you guys have had too much to do, and you don't really have the same statutory mandate. Yeah. There's not really anyone to do it, I think, is the big problem for it.
I mean, I think that, you know, in terms of confusion, you know, on the Seafood Watch card, 97% of US fisheries are yellow or green, so we're not really
Yeah.
getting in anyone's way, but I do think that there's, fish has always confused people, I think, in terms of a product to cook at home. So you really have to deal with restaurants, and I think the tuna industry's probably dealt with this the most in terms of trying to find ways of dealing
Could
with
I,
that
at
concern.
this point, interject
Yeah.
the dismal science? Economics. By the way, there's some fascinating books out about the world economy and who gets all the money in the marketplace. It's not that difficult to understand what's happening with consumption of seafood if you look at it globally. World capture seafood production has stayed the same for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's probably at its limit. It's not going to grow anymore. The growth that is projected by FAO is in aquaculture. And as we see more and more places in the world develop, particularly China and India, they are developing classes of society that have the capacity to start buying canned tuna, shrimp, which are the biggest products that get consumed in the United States. And as a result, price is going up. Price is definitely going up. And so in this country, as the middle class has not gained very much in the last 10 years, their buying power for canned tuna, for example, is going down. And they just aren't buying it. You know, it used to be a staple, and now it's more expensive, and they have to do special sales. So I think you have to take into account that there's some fundamental economics going on here with regard to fish products. And it's becoming more attractive because everybody is now agreeing it's healthier. I discount somewhat these campaigns and labeling kinds of things because they've tested that. Some really good people have tested in Europe, which is a big canned tuna market. And they basically ask the consumer, you know, MSC tuna, dolphin safe, you know, dolphin friendly, all these labels. And so the experts come in and say, well, what's the most important thing to the consumer? And the consumer says, price, number one, price number two, price number three.
Okay, I don't want to stop the conversation, but I have to stop the conversation.